Yes, now.
Okay. Oh, there we are.
Oh, there it is.
Hey, everyone. I am so glad that you could join us tonight. I am absolutely thrilled to have some very special folks, some very talented writers here to talk about using history in crime fiction, including alternate history, history mixed with established fictional worlds, not mentioning anyone, Laurie, and recent and not so recent American history. So I will go around the dial, as it were, and introduce our panelists. Laurie King is the New York Times best-selling author of 30 novels and other works, including the Mary Russell Sherlock Holmes stories. The Beekeeper's Apprentice was chosen as one of the 20th century best crime novels by IMBA. She's won the Agatha, Anthony, Creasy, Edgar, Lambda, McCavity, Wolf, and Romantic Times Career Achievement Awards. Has an honorary doctorate in theology and is a Baker Street irregular. In 2022, she was named Grandmaster by the Mystery Writers of America. She had co-edited with Lee Child the new Handbook for Mystery Writers of America, How to Write a Mystery, and has a new contemporary series with SFPD Inspector Raquel Lang, beginning with Back to the Garden. And next to her is Toni L.P. Kelner, who is the author of 11 mystery novels, 8 Laura Fleming mysteries, and 3 Where Are They Now mysteries. Kelner has also co-edited several best-selling urban fantasy anthologies with Charlaine Harris. Wait a minute. You guys know each other?
We've met once or twice.
Oh, that's cool. Nice. Okay. Most recently, The Skeleton Rides a Horse and Other Stories was published, which is a short story collection with 12 stories spanning Kelner's 30-year writing career. It includes several award nominees and the Agatha Award-winning Sleeping with the Plush. In other exciting news, Kelner's short story, Toni's short story, Baby Trap, was included for inclusion in Mariner Books' The Best American Mystery and Suspense 2024, edited by S.A. Cosby and Steph Cha. She also writes as Lee Perry. And going around, we have Cheryl Head, is the award-winning Charlie Mack author of the Charlie Mack Motown Mysteries, set in Detroit. Time's Undoing, her 2023 historical fiction novel, unravels the mystery around the police murder of a young Black man in Birmingham, Alabama. In Alabama's Jim Crow era. It's based on her family's personal tragedy. Time's Undoing was a finalist for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize, as well as the Agatha, Strand Critics, McCavity, Anthony, and Hurston Wright Legacy Awards. Did I miss anything there? Because I feel like you've racked up a few since then, Cheryl?
Always a bridesmaid, never a bride.
Head's 2013 novel, Long Way Home, is a World War II novel set in 1943 and tells the story of segregated service of Black male and female soldiers who remained on the U.S. home front during the war. Her books are included in the special collections of the State of Michigan Library, and she lives in Washington, D.C. And next to her is Charlaine Harris, whose career as a novelist began in 1981 with her first book, A Conventional Mystery. Since then, Charlaine's written urban fantasy, science fiction, and horror. In addition to over 40 length books, she has written numerous short stories and 3 graphic novels in collaboration with Christopher Golden. She's featured on bestseller lists many times, and her works have been adapted for 3, soon to be 5 television shows, maybe?
Who knows?
Who knows? She now lives on top of a cliff on the Brazos River with a husband and 2 rescue dogs, and she's a very happy camper. Allegedly. No. My name is Dana Cameron. I've written, 11 novels, including the Emma Fielding archaeology mysteries, 3 of which were made into movies for the Hallmark Movie and Mystery Channel, and 3 urban fantasy Fangborn novels, and 2 standalones, about 30 short stories, all of which were informed by my earlier career in archaeology. I've been nominated for the Edgar Award and won several Agathas, Anthonys, and McCavities. And my most recent book is Anna Hoyt, a novel of colonial crime, which is a noir novel set in the 1740s Boston. So thank you again for everyone for joining me tonight. It occurs to me starting off that in looking at our collective work, our historical fictions in general benefit from having a character who is outside or who has a specific lens or ability or a goal in looking at a particular historical period. Would you please introduce your point of view character and tell us what he or she does to take the reader into the past? Laurie, you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, I write various things to do with the past. The Russell and Holmes novels are set starting in 1915 during the Great War, and we're now up to 1925 after 19 books. they're not moving very fast. And I have there's 2 books in a sort of mini series, the Stuyvesant and Gray mini series that are set slightly later in the 20s, at the beginning of the first one has to do with the general strike in England in 1926, and the second one is just at the just before the stock market falls apart. So they're tied into things there. And then the Raquel Lang ones have, the first one has to do with a sort of historical of the 1970s. I love the idea of 70s being historical. You kind of do research by looking through your old photo albums.
It's bad when like all the antique shows and everything say, well, this comes all the way back from 1970, and one smothers a curse and attempts to carry on listening.
Yes, well,
pleasantly.
Historical here. but yeah, I mean, I love writing historical stuff because it gives you a window into the present, and you can use it as, less a window than a mirror of looking at who we are reflected back then. So
Okay, Cheryl, would you like to tackle that?
Sure. So I've written 2 historicals, both about the African American experience. I wrote a novel called Long Way Home about the Black soldiers, called Negroes at the time, experience in World War II as second-class soldiers. And so I really wanted them to, through their prism, to talk about their time, their service time, when the challenges were not so much about bravado and being at the front lines and the courage of battle, but the courage it took to serve faithfully in an army that treated both the men, Black men and Black women, as second-class soldiers. In my most recent book, Times Undoing, it's set in 1929 Jim Crow South in Birmingham, Alabama. And my historical protagonist, because it's a dual narrative, dual timeline, the historical protagonist is really a person who, based on my own grandfather, a person who is a proud Black man who is not functioning with the mores of that period. In other words, he's proud, and he's probably too proud for his own good, one of the characters says. And so it shows his life in Birmingham until his death by the Birmingham, Alabama police over a 4-month period.
Toni, how about you? What you want to take skull and cross examinations or sleeping with the plush, or?
Well, I do less historical mystery than my other co-panelists, mainly because I'm really lazy, and to do the research is a lot of work. I admire it, but I don't really want to emulate it. I haven't thought about using the 70s. At one point, my daughter, they were doing a thing at school where you could dress up as, this grade was going to be the 50s day and this was going to be 60s. And my daughter said, did you have 60s day when you were growing up, Mom? And I'm like, sweetie, it was the 60s. And her eyes got about yay big. You saw the 60s? Yeah, I saw the whole thing there. I was there for all of it. Well, most of it. But with Sleeping with the Plush was set in kind of near future, not too far back in the 50s. And honestly, it was because the source material was set in a carnival, and the source material I was reading and were carnies back from the 50s. And I wasn't entirely sure that all the language and the way things worked was the same now as it was then. So I thought, well, I'll just set it then, and I can dodge having to do more research. the other historical I've done is I've done a couple of stories about pirates, golden age of piracy, the spelling cross examinations, as the story that's in my current collection. And I did do some historical research, but I've got to say that my tomes tended to be things like Pirates for Dummies rather than authentic source material and lots of pirate movies. I was kind of got the idea for an idealized view of the past.
Gotcha. Charlaine.
Okay, well, my latest series that I've been doing for 6 years now, which is evidently a big secret because no one ever seems to know I'm writing them. The Gunny Rose series is about a woman who makes her living by guarding shipments of people or goods, as she's hired to do, through a divided United States that's, I think, 5 countries after the Depression, the assassination of Franklin Delano Roosevelt before he could take office, and the Spanish flu, calamities that really wiped America out and really could have if the assassination attempt had actually been successful. I feel like America would have been a very different place without Roosevelt. So I love the world building part of it. And I kind of enjoyed the research, which I kind of did as I needed it, because you know, all of a sudden you think, wait a minute, how many people in America did have a refrigerator in 1936? And I did some research on that. I didn't know what I needed to know until I needed to know it. And then after I almost had finished all the books, a friend of mine who has written an historical book, and I just love him to pieces, he said, gosh, you know, the great thing is to get a diary of somebody in that time period and read it. And I thought, well, I wish you would tell me that 6 books ago. I would have enjoyed that tip. It never occurred to me. But, you know, they are what they are. And I think they're fairly historically accurate. But it being a divided America gives me quite a bit of wiggle room.
Yeah, and the fact that it's an alternative reality, you can say, well, the thing that might have triggered that particular event didn't happen because
yes,
do a lot of hand waving.
It didn't happen in my America, so there you have it.
No, I like that. It's like it didn't happen in my world, so you know, off you go.
Yeah,
it was for me. The Anna Hoyt is she's living in Boston in the 1740s, and she is in the unusual position of being able to run as well as own her own tavern. There's a legal nicety called femme sole merchant, or femme sole, a woman who is authorized by the justices to act on her own, almost as if she were a man. And Anna's struggles when someone wants to buy the tavern and she sees it as her only way of surviving. Her struggles are in that she has no other recourse but her own wits, because the law is the law, but you know, these particular thieves aren't particularly worried about a piece of paper that says she has the right. Her husband is willing to sell it out from under her, and the question is, what is she willing to do to survive? And I think
a great deal. As
but it's one of those things that's like, well, of course, you know, no one's going to be upset because he beats me. Husbands are expected to correct their wives, and things that would raise our eyebrows and our hackles these days are sort of matter of course at the time. So it was being able for her to use her to look at that period and see how she's reacting to it versus what we as modern people would do to would react. And I like playing around with that, just because, well, you know, of course, you know, she has X, Y, and Z happening. It's expected. And these days one hopes things have changed, but you know, as Anna demonstrates, sometimes not so much.
Not enough anyway.
Not enough. Here. Okay, so general question, and anyone jump in, please. How do you maintain the pace of a story if your setting doesn't have cell phones, jets, 50 caliber machine guns, or forensic labs?
Well, it certainly slows things down, doesn't it?
Mhm.
But a bullet travels just as fast.
Ooh, that was cold. I love that answer.
It's the truth. Usually, when things get slow in my books, I kill someone.
Okay.
It's a good technique.
Yes. Yes, it is good.
I'm bored. Step in front of this bullet.
Yeah, I don't know that the book's pacing has that much to do with, the actual speed of life. I mean, it does make, for example, how you move your characters around a bigger consideration, because most of the Russell books take place in a very tight time span. The one that I've just finished, it'll be out next year, is like 8 days. So it's during that time, if you're moving them from here to there and there to here, you have to be aware that, one, it took a long time. So that when, in this book, they go off to Ireland, it's not something that you can just sort of drive and get on a ferry and go across. You have to really commit yourself to going. And people tended not to travel as much. I mean, a trip to London from Wales would be a major thing. Even if the train ran right through your village, it would be a major thing because people just didn't go that much. People tended to stay closer to home. Not everyone. The upper classes in the 20s when I write, tended to move around a lot. But even they, you don't get to Australia in a day.
Right. Right.
I think the pacing, since I've mostly done short historical, is what Laurie said, is keeping it contained, a very specific point of view. Sleeping in the Plush, I think it's only over a weekend. So, admittedly, some weekends feel like they last longer than others, but I can keep things moving pretty well. And Skull and Cross Examinations is, I think, even less time. So by keeping the timeline short, I'm avoiding all the travel part. They're already on a pirate ship, so you don't have to see how the months and months going across the Atlantic. They're nearly at Port Royal, so it's all good. So I think that kind of keeps the pacing. As far as the forensics, I think historical is an advantage because you don't have to worry about, by the time you publish, that they have now discovered a way to measure someone's death potential by, or how fast their bullets go with an app on your phone. It's probably not going to, you don't have to have all of those. Which is what I really like about historical. Like I don't have to rely, so I don't have to learn as much. Because again, lazy. I don't have to research the high tech. I don't have to research the history that much. I like it right in the middle where it's easy.
Well, and for me, I tend to use the middle of the book to take some time around historical, like slice of life things, which fascinates me. So in the World War II book, I have a section where I'm explaining this family who's taking Saturday to clean their house. And I had a ball writing that. I mean, maybe the reader thought, why are we watching these people do laundry? And but I had fun looking at the mechanics of that and what was available and that kind of thing. And same thing in Time's Undoing. It was a booming time in Birmingham because they were just involved in the steel and iron industries, and so it was a nice clip of the city at that point. But and that goes for the segregated parts of town where Black folks lived as well. So I spent some time talking about how people grocery shopped and how they did their daily lives and how they traveled from place to place and that kind of thing. I had fun with that.
Yeah, I mean, you can tell that too because you look at the way that was it Robert or Lee looks forward to taking his family shopping and then taking them to church and showing them off and everything.
Yeah,
and it's a nice one.
And
I like
the organization that takes, to.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Because I mean, maybe not everyone had a car.
Right.
He, of course, had a quite beautiful one. And you have to think about, the butcher gave them an extra bag for their parcels and everything. And that's a big deal. I like to use it. I mean, I treat it. Anna goes back and forth across to London a couple of times, and what I try to do there is use it as a narrative space to fill in either the background of what she has to do, or her plans, or her feelings about it. And then I don't, the voyage might have taken 4 weeks to 6 weeks, but it's only about a paragraph in any of the things. And it's also another moment to comment on, I think, the social situation she was in, about when she first goes over, and she doesn't know anything about England, and when she is far more familiar with it and she knows how better to travel, you see her learning. And that's sort of I think that's a useful thing when your character learns something, and it's the same moment that the reader's also learning it.
Mhm.
Let's see. Let me ask one more general question, and then I'll get into the specific ones. Were you an expert in the historical period that you wrote in before you started writing it? And if not, how did you come up with the characters and the convincing setting?
Whoa. Okay. I was not an expert on anything, but I did have a fascination with the last Romanov family, and they were set in my world. They survived and were set, escaped in a boat and traveled around for years trying to find a nation that would accept them. Mm-hmm. And that was a big part of my planning, because I wanted them to live. Mm-hmm. And who doesn't want to be the Emperor of California, right? So that just seemed like, I just thought, I'm just going to bring together everything that I've been interested in that time period and just change it all and have fun with it. And that was what it turned out to be.
That sounds like a lot of the answer you've given for like why you started writing the Suki books. It's like you took all the things you wanted to write about and wrote about them. And yeah. I think that's a fabulous reason for writing anything.
Well, I've been doing something right then.
There you go. And it took me to tell you so, right?
Well, actually, I never put that to myself that way. So that does make me feel pretty good. Thank you.
Cool. Oh, my pleasure. I'm just here. Laurie, did you have a thought there?
Yeah, I was not an expert. I'm not a historian at all. I kind of backed into the time period starting in 1915 because what I wanted to do was write about a young woman who met and became the apprentice of Sherlock Holmes. And so my dates were fairly firm because I had to work around what Conan Doyle was doing with him. Mm-hmm. The last setting for any of the Conan Doyle stories is the beginning of the Great War, 1914. Yep. So that gives me the spring of 1915 to bring the two characters together. And that's where my research starts. What's going on in England during the war, what's going on in England after the war, these huge changes that take place. And I move them around the world. So I get to look at, what's going on in Palestine in 1919 and, India at the beginning of the independence movement and that kind of thing. So I have new research that each book requires because they're all set in different places, but it's all linked together by being in the same, so far, decade historically. Mm-hmm. With one exception, there's one large section of one of the books that is about Mrs. Hudson's past, and talk about women that have an interesting past. Mrs. Mm-hmm. Hudson was one of those. She and Anna Hoyt, I think, would have had something to say. But so that for her, I needed to go back into the Victorian era and look at her youth when she and Sherlock Holmes first encountered each other. So that was a sort of chunk of research that was from a different time and involved everything from the kind of language spoken, the transportation, the women's fashion. Oh my God, women's fashion in the 19th century, it changed every 2 years. So you had to be very careful to not have crinolines on the wrong part of the 80s. But yeah, no, it's sort of an ongoing research depending on where I am and when.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Now, Toni, you just said that you don't like doing the research.
What I do is Charlaine was talking about doing things she liked and putting them all in. I find something I like and I read about it for fun. I'd read about carnies and circuses for years just for fun. I read about pirates again just because I enjoy it, and then eventually I'll come up with a story idea based on it. With Skull and Cross Examinations, the MWA was doing an anthology of legal thrillers, and it's like I know even less about legal thrillers than I do historical. So it's like, but somewhere I had read that when a pirate ship is incorporated, as it were, they have a set of ship's articles. There's a few examples that still survive, which they sign or they do their little acts if they can't write. They have to agree with. And I thought, well, if you have a set of rules, then chances are they have them because people will break them. If you're going to break something, you have to have some kind of court. Mm-hmm. And from that, and I just kind of built that, and then found out later that actually pirates did, for fun, put on fake courts on ships just to practice, because they figured they'd all would be someday in front of a court of admiralty and they would need to know how to work. Sometimes they knew more about courtroom procedure than lawyers, which is true in my thing. Basically, for me, the research is something I really like reading about, and I've got a lot of interest in. I'm not an expert in any of them, but I like them. Mm-hmm. But it's funny when you're writing them, and Charlaine also mentioned learning as you go, or learning what you need to know when you know it, and writing that. And Skull and Cross, I named the boat, and I thought, well, that sounds like a good piratey ship name. And I showed it to Dana, who is, of course, archaeologist in that era, and she's like, no. Well, what can I call it? Call it this. Okay. So that's why I have a proviso. We're talking pirate movies, not pirate history, because. But when I can get it right, I do try to.
You were very, very brave.
Or too stupid to know any better. It did not get into the anthology, by the way, but it got into a magazine, so it was fine.
There you go.
Toni, has anyone ever accused you of historical inaccuracy? Has anyone ever even brought it up?
Besides me.
Besides Dana?
That's correct. That's different. And I get more accused of modern day inaccuracy than anything else, honestly. It's like, why do I either putting politics or non-binary characters, and why am I shoving that in? It's like, this is one of my Lee Perry books is set in an art school. And I found out when my daughter went to art school that the gender ratio was 1 to 1 to 1 to 1. And so it was like, you cannot have everyone's trait in an art school in the modern era.
No,
I have for that as I ever did for anything historical, honestly, because of the world I don't live in. I need to research it.
Yeah,
but not too much because I'm lazy.
You keep saying that, and I just don't believe it. Because where are we at? 40 short stories there. Ish, yeah. Cheryl.
I was a child who grew up not interested in history at all. So in school, I was a great student, but didn't like the history. I just did what was required. But I am now a geek. It's so fascinating to me now, and it's because I think both Toni and Charlaine said the things you learn. And I do think I will always think of myself as a lifelong learner, and there'll be one or two things that just pique my interest, and then I'm off to the races. My problem in doing real research is that I really will go down the rabbit hole sometimes. So I have to set parameters for myself. So I think I was working on one of the last Charlie books. And I was in Wikipedia, and you know how they have links, and you can hit the links. And the next thing I knew, swear to God, I was on the Paul Anka page, and I couldn't remember how I got there. What just happened?
I love that. I love that because it's all connected somehow. But then when you go back, it's like, am I doing this for fun now, or am I doing this for real research?
when I was researching werewolves, all of a sudden, well, not all of a sudden, after about 2 hours of link here and link there, I found myself watching live wolves in Yellowstone.
Yeah.
And it was just like, I thought, this is so nice. Oh, really? This has nothing to do with what I was set out to find out. But boy, this is just a great way to spend the time.
Yeah.
It's like that thing, when you get older, you go upstairs and you go like, why did I come up here?
Yeah.
But you usually find something to do while you're there.
It's unless I have a post-it note in my hand when I'm going upstairs, and maybe not even then am I guaranteed. But yeah, I guess I knew a bunch about 18th century Boston. Basically, if Toni's going to plead laziness, I'm going to plead fear, desperation. I was having lunch with a friend of mine, and he says, "Hey, you write short stories?" And at that point, I'd written 1.5. I said, "Of course I do. Everyone writes short stories because that's what you do when you're a writer." And he says, "Well, someone's dropped out of the table of contents for Boston Noir. Do you want to contribute?" I'm like, "Hell yeah." And he says, "Yeah, Dennis Lehane is editing." And I completely went, and he says, "Let me run it past the folks at Akashic Noir who do the City Noir series, and we'll see if you get it." And they go, "Okay, great. Give us a story. You've got 2 weeks." And I immediately had a cow, not even a calf. It was a full cow. And I said, "Well, I can't write a crime story. I'm not going to set it in Kenmore Square and do academic noir. I've lived that. I don't want to go through any more of that." I'm like, I'm
But
really
you
not.
can find all kinds of people to kill off, Dana. Come on now.
Oh, I absolutely. However, I was just tired of running down a list every day just to warm up to go into do work. I'm like, I could set it in the North End, and everyone associates that with organized crime. But what if it's in the 1740s? I'm better with crime in the 18th century than I am about sussing out how to do a good crime in the 20th century, 21st century. And so I took all of my desperation and wanting to do a really great story and thinking about how a lot of noir writers, not all, but a lot of them look at women writers who write traditional mysteries, which I was doing with the Emma Fielding books. And I put all of that anger into it. And that is what came out on the other side, which is, I think it's a fairly accurate reflection of my emotions at the time. But I was worried about how it would be seen by other archaeologists and other historians. And I got a note from the then Mass State archaeologist. And I was like, uh-oh, I'm about to get yelled at. And it was actually a really lovely letter saying that I captured the life of Boston that was implied by the artifacts that people found. And I was like, yay! I didn't mess up too bad. But yeah, Anna's still unlikable, but she was born of that desperation of my own background research into merchants in the 18th century.
Yeah, isn't it lovely when you get feedback from somebody who actually knows?
Yes.
And they say, and every so often you'll hear from somebody who is really good and they really know, and they'll say, I never knew that, and I looked it up, and you think, oh God, and I had this extraordinary letter from the Green Peer, the guy who was a Green Party, but he was from the House of Lords.
Gotcha.
Who wrote about there was a scene in one of the books that had to do with decanting a bottle of very old port by actually you have these hot tongs and you squeeze it, and then and then you can break it and snap it off, and you don't have glass all over everything. And so he said he'd never come across that, and so he consulted his wine expert and found that he's going to have to try it one of these times.
Yay!
Yeah. Wow.
That's it, right. That's one of those letters you save,
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's like, yes, I'll have to consult with my sommelier. And I'm like, no, Laurie said it was so. So you go ahead with that. Toni, let's start with some specific questions. in your stories, Sleeping with the Plush and Skull and Cross-Examination, you are dealing with itinerant groups with bad reputations, sometimes deserved, sometimes not. I'm thinking of the carnival workers in the 50s and 60s with Treasure Hunt and William Cunningham and on The Brazen Mermaid. What is it that draws you to these communities?
I just find that these worlds within worlds is one of my favorite things. And the worlds behind the worlds. I think, well, with William Cunningham here, I wanted to make him a lawyer, but I just wanted to make him very good at it. And I like the idea of being someone who's captured by pirates and finding, maybe they're not that bad. He's like, look, this guy just was threatening to torture me. And it's like, oh no, he would have tortured me. Well, the story's over. It's okay. I'm alive. But I just get fascinated by worlds within worlds. That, I mean, every day you meet people and they know so much about this strange little thing, which is not uncommon. There's thousands of people who do it. I've been listening to a podcast called Death in the Afternoon, which is by a group called the Order of the Good Death. And they are funeral home. They're trying to renovate the funeral home business, the funeral business.
Okay.
And just these little things about green burial and aquamation and all these things. It's like, which have been around a long time, but I never knew anything about them. And I love these kind of things that are going on behind the doors. And it's like, and it's a secret. I just never knew. And so I think that's what they kind of have a lot in common. It's like, there's the and also I like language. And the language of carnivals is fascinating. I mean, all the calling the Bath of the Donaker and the Grab Shack and all of that, I just find fascinating. I don't know why. They're just kind of fun. Pirates, less funky language other than the way they speak. Another thing I would love to do with the pirates to revisit it is he goes to Port Royal in Jamaica. I don't know if y'all know, but at one point, Port Royal was destroyed. There was a hurricane hit, and it was like under most of the city. The original city is still underwater.
Whoa.
And it's like, yeah, I mean, they built another one, but it's not the same one. And someday I want to do that story, but that's going to take a lot of research, so it might not be tomorrow.
Cheryl, you know how much I love your work in Time's Undoing, and you're alternating between these 1929 and 2019 timelines, and you managed not to give away any of the secrets in either one until the stories are both properly concluded. And can you talk about how you balance those two stories about what life was like for a Black man who was too proud for his own good, as one of your characters said, in the Jim Crow era, and the more recent BLM movement? I mean, it's a technical question, but I love how you juxtapose those to show what has changed, what has gone underground, etc.
Well, I knew I wanted to write this story about based on my grandfather's death right after the George Floyd murder. But as I was writing, so I started writing that and researching at the same time, because I really didn't know a lot about the details of my grandfather's death, because it had been kind of veiled in mythology for all of my life. Partly because Black people were afraid to talk about police, and so it didn't really trickle down the way some stories can. So I started writing it and researching at the same time, writing in the morning, researching every day in the afternoon, 2 or 3 hours, going down the rabbit hole, of course. And at some point I said to myself, what young person is going to want to read this story about a 90-year-old story about a Black man in 1929? Will young people come to this story? It was the question I was asking myself, because I really wanted to make the point, look at policing now and looking policing then. Have things really changed, and how do we make it better, and what can we learn from the past? And so I added the 2019 character really as a way to help young people get into that story. So it was kind of my conceit to do that. But I really didn't know that character, nor did I like her very much until kind of halfway through writing her. I go like, oh, okay, she's not so bad after all. She kind of got some spunk,
Yeah.
Yeah. So then it became just the technique of balancing out the story so that it felt seamless when I was going from era to era. And I used lots of devices to do that. Sometimes it was epistolary, so I had letters. Sometimes that kind of connected the two eras. Sometimes it was another kind of object. Sometimes when it's an experience, I have the character going to church in 1929, and then the character going to a church where Black Lives Matter training is going on. So I was looking for those kind of devices to connect the two eras.
Yeah, that's so interesting because I never would have guessed that. Oh God, I'm going to call her Mackenzie. Megan Mackenzie.
Yeah,
Megan's story was
an
being
afterthought.
as an afterthought. It never would have occurred to me.
Yeah,
that's amazing. And so I have to ask, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but when you were doing the research in the afternoon, were you looking into your own grandfather's circumstances?
Yeah. I absolutely was. Yeah,
Wow.
I was Googling his name, and then I had access to newspapers.com, which I highly recommend.
Yep.
And I'm just, keywords, Robert Harrington, 75,000 just in Alabama at that time. So, because, Robert Lee was a famous name in the South, and Black people and white people had that name.
Wow. That's mind-boggling. That's a lot of work to go through.
It was.
Welcome to researching. Yay! Oh, Charlaine, you've kind of already answered my question, but I'll give you a moment to elucidate if you like.
Okay.
Or you can answer something else. That's fine.
Okay.
Your alternate Weird West adventures with Gunny Rose occur in an alternate U.S.
Yeah.
And you had said earlier that you chose a specific event as the catalyst for that. And apart from your fascination with the imperial family, the Russian imperial family, what was it that FDR's death, what was it there about that made you think, this is how this history happens, this alternate history happens?
I had to find enough events that would have split the U.S. up if things had fallen differently. The Spanish flu recurred several times. It didn't just sweep through once. And it hit a lot of enlisted men primarily because they were in barracks. The Wall Street failure was another thing that really, really devastated the U.S. The Dust Bowl.
Yep.
And then if FDR had not been president, he was really a great president in many, many ways. He really pulled everybody together. And if he hadn't been there, and that was at a time when, and here's what I found out that surprised me, it wasn't necessarily obvious that the vice president would step up. That wasn't in the rule book.
Really? Oh, interesting.
I know. I was really surprised. I thought that was,
So the line of succession was
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
the succession was not that clear. And then I had the vice president die of the Spanish flu anyway. So I thought, well, as long as I'm being drastic, just clear the board. And I figured, figuring out the split was the tricky thing.
Yep.
And finally, I thought, well, the original Southern states would be Dixie, except Georgia. Georgia would stick with the original 13 colonies, and they would be New Britannia.
Yep.
And then, of course, Mexico would invade from the south, and Canada would invade from the north, because you know how tricky those Canadians are. And they would take back a good portion of the northern United States, and the Mexicans would come up into the lower part of the U.S. and take back some of that they originally owned anyway. So that was another big surprise.
Yeah.
But it just seemed to develop pretty naturally, if you're in my head, that they would divide that way. And then I thought California and Oregon. Oh, and that was where I had to bring in the Romanovs. Because I just thought, they're going to land there.
Yep.
Hearst is going to invite them to Hearst Castle. It's going to be great. They're going to feel so happy there. And since California is going to split off, they need a ruling system. And who would the movie industry like for rulers? The Romanovs. Heck yeah.
Awesome. I didn't know a lot of that stuff. I was like, wow, the West Wing has finally let me down in terms of the history of the succession, you know?
I was really surprised.
Yeah. I mean,
Laurie, you and I, let me say, congratulations on 30 years, the anniversary of The Beekeeper's Apprentice. Yay! Love Mary Russell. As we both know, Sherlockian scholars can be very particular about how someone interprets the 60-odd stories and novels of the canon. How do you balance the events, the historical events that we all recognize in the 19th and early 20th century with what happens in the canon? Or do you try to reconcile them at all?
Well, I don't really have to. That was one of the decisions I made early on, was I wasn't writing pastiches, because with a pastiche, you have to, sort of borrow somebody's characters and give them an adventure and then sort of put them back into place where you found them, dust them off. And and I didn't have to do that because, Conan Doyle was finished with Holmes by the time I started having him do things with, with Russell.
Mm-hmm.
He continued to write the stories on into the late 20s, but they were all set before. So after 1914, he's mine. So
I love how proprietary you are, because it's not Mary Russell, it's and Russell. It's like you went to boarding school together or something, And then it's like, and then after 1914 he's mine, or after 1920 he's mine.
Sure, yeah. He's finished with him, and it actually has been really interesting because the first half dozen books or so, I was very, very clear about they were Mary Russell stories, and Holmes was a sort of supporting actor.
Mm-hmm.
And he was very much the Victorian detective who's quite puzzled by the 20th century and this feminist girl and all the rest of it. And he's, trying to catch up with life. And I don't know, maybe 8 or so books in, I realized that I was doing the same kind of thing that Conan Doyle did, which was selling the man short. Conan Doyle just assumed that there was no place for Sherlock Holmes in the England after the Great War, that he belonged in the Victorian era, that he wouldn't have been able to make sense of these vast changes that took place in Britain. And so let's just make him, fade away as of 1914. And I thought that really is selling that extraordinary mind and heart short.
Yeah.
That Holmes as a person would have been able to deal with the changes and would have been fascinated by them and would have been challenged by them.
Yes.
And so that's where I started with that. I have the last 10 books or so, he's really developed as a person in ways that I try and keep his roots firmly in the Conan Doyle canon, because that's him.
Yeah.
But to allow him to grow in ways that Conan Doyle just couldn't, and certainly didn't. So it's been interesting.
That's a really lovely sentiment. You're sort of giving him wings and adaptations when Conan Doyle was chucking him off the Reichenbach, to a certain extent when he got done with them.
Yeah.
But then, there was more publishing money to be had.
Yeah, he had bills to pay.
Yes. Yeah,
I
Charlaine. Miss Charlaine.
How much older is Sherlock than Mary?
Let's see. He's 30. Let's see. He's He was born in 1871, and anyway, he's in his late 50s when he meets her. So he's, I guess, about 40 years older.
Wow.
My husband was 30 years older than I was, so it doesn't seem weird.
No,
Right,
I thought you might be using that as a template.
Well, Noel, my husband was born in India in 1922, and his Indian heritage was a lot more of a problem in our communication than his chronology.
Interesting.
Because he was somebody who had grown up with servants and just assumed that that there were people to do things for you, which is hi. Not necessarily, sweetheart.
My name's Laurie. We're going to talk about this.
It was it always was a minor consideration, the age difference. So.
Well, I mean, and others pointed out that it was just after the Great War, and so a wide span of years between a young woman marrying an older man was not all that different because there just weren't the young men around.
Yeah, roughly a quarter of that generation was just gone, either because of they were killed in the war or the Spanish flu, or they were so badly injured that they were not marriage material. And so if a woman, didn't want to live her life solitary, she had to look outside her normal range of people that she would have taken. So you have marriage in between classes that you would not have seen before the war, and ages, educational backgrounds, country backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds. There was a much more flexibility in partnering in that period of the teens and 20s than you would have seen before.
We have a couple of folks who may have questions. Jay and Heidi, do you want to chime in with some questions now? Write them down and I will read them, and we can see if the panelists are interested in answering them.
Maybe
not. Let's see. I know, Laura, you're a big fan of using Baedekers. What does everyone love for their favorite item of looking into the past? Is there a particular thing that you love?
In fact, can you see my little pile of Baedekers there?
Yes.
I got a moving map from Beacons Moving and Storage in 1933. I bought it off eBay, and boy, did I use that. Because that was the way the city, the books are set in different areas in what America has become. But two of them are set in San Diego. And so that map was just like a godsend.
Yeah.
Cheryl, you said you went through a lot of newspapers?
Yeah, newspapers. I like census records. So I spent a lot of time on Ancestry.com.
Gotcha.
So you have kind of lots of resources there: census records, city directories, probably pirate ship inventories, Toni, that kind of stuff. So you can find a lot of type of. And I did always have in front of me photographs, a map of Birmingham. I had a book that describes the Magic City, which is what Birmingham was called during that time. So I had a lot of the research kind of piled in front of me while I was writing it. But the photograph was the thing that kind of inspired me. I only have one photograph of my grandfather, and I kept that kind of piled there so I could look at it every once in a while and keep going.
Sure.
Yeah.
Toni?
I was just saying, you're talking about finding your stuff about your grandfather. Because my mother's parents divorced and remarried, I ended up with 3 grandfathers. So I going through the ancestry. My sister got big at the ancestry, and she found all sorts of stuff about my grandfather, like that when he was in jail, that we didn't know he was in prison camp. We didn't know anything about. And it's like, oh, well, that's interesting. And he was brought into it because he was doing a job with one of my other grandfather's brothers. And it's like, oh, this is fascinating. And my sister, do you suppose this is really true? This probably isn't really our grandfather's. Like, sweet, his name is Collis, Collis. How many do you think there were? I mean, we're not talking Robert Lee here. We're talking Collis. So that's been fascinating. According to the books I used, someone mentioned memoirs, people's memoirs with a story.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I love for doing the kind of research. When I was doing Sleeping with the Plush was, there's a book called Eyeing the Flash, and which was a guy who basically spent a year and a half, 2 seasons as a game agent, working the different, and a lot more complicated ones than just duck ponds and stuff. Mm-hmm. And learning about his experience as someone who had not grown up in the Carney, going into it, learning how to do this stuff. That's what I like. Because and one of the chapters was called Sleeping with the Plush. And what that means is someone who's didn't make enough money doing whatever game they're running, so they can't afford the bunkhouse, and they can't afford a hotel room that night. So they put all the stuffed animals down and they sleep on them. So think about that when you take one of those homes. Like, has anyone been sleeping on this? I don't know. Don't know if they still do that, which is why I said a historical, because I want to make sure that I was doing it right.
Yeah.
But yeah, those single author memoirs are the best.
Yeah.
Dave, could I add one more thing?
Oh yeah, please.
In looking at the newspapers, I would read them front to back of the ones I found that were digitized. But the part of the paper that was the most revealing were usually the personal ads, the classified ads, and the advertisements all together. It tells you so much about the times and what's important to people, the language they use, people's movements. Mm-hmm. It was amazing. That part was amazing. Yeah.
I love looking at those things. I did a paper on dress lengths as they changed during the 1920s, looking at ads from magazines.
Yes.
But I love to read diaries. I mean, I wouldn't say that's principally the reason I went into archaeology or historical archaeology. I love reading what people were saying when no one was watching them. The same with writing letters to their loved ones.
Right. Letters and diaries are always great.
Yes.
Yeah. But Charlaine was mentioning a map, and there are things called insurance maps that are amazing because they show everything in like 3-dimensional. I mean, they're exquisite. So if you're doing anything with the 19th century, they're wonderful. We have a couple of questions. Let's see. Heidi asks, how do you share a historical story that you feel is important but has a lot of holes or incomplete details about it? And she's thinking about the story of her cousin in 1865 who was part of the Native American slave trade.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow. Well, if you want it to be an historically accurate one, you just don't do it if you've got that many gaps. But if you're going to write a fictional novel about it, you can feel free to fill in those gaps with whatever seems logical and likely to you in the context of the times.
Yeah, and I'm writing a Western now set in 1870.
Ooh. And
so I'm using a combination of things. There's a lot of legislative documents you can find. So railroad documents, go to the industries that are booming at the time, and you can find materials. And then people write great biographies of the great men and women of those times. So I'm reading the big 800-page Grant biography, which is sort of useful.
It's 800 pages.
The other technique is if you've got holes and gaps, don't write a novel, write a short story. Because you can hide things so much more easily. That works for me. Because you're only writing about a certain incident, you just write about the piece you know. You don't have to write their whole life if you don't want to.
I just lie.
That's good.
Yeah, because most of my books have real life people in them because they move around, and so they're meeting. I mean, one of the ideas is they go someplace and they meet somebody, and so I have this couple of absolutely insane Irish people that I'm working on in the current book. And obviously, if you're dealing with somebody who isn't really well known, then you don't have biographies and articles about them and so forth and so on. So I just fill in the things that here's what I know about them and here's what I need them to do. Mm-hmm. And I just make a note at the end saying, by the way, there's no evidence to show that Mary Russell saw this, or no, this guy probably didn't kill that person.
Yes.
Probably.
Aside to his heirs and assigns, this probably didn't happen.
Yeah. Yes.
You know. And we have a question from Jay, introducing himself. He is a fairly new Deep South speculative novelist and short story writer, about 10 years in. And his question is, have you ever completed a scene or a draft and later found your historical data to be completely accurate? Do you mean to say accurate, Jay, or inaccurate? Or are you just surprising yourself and saying, yeah, hey, this totally works?
I was right all the time.
Right?
Yeah, either way. Yeah.
Well, if we're talking accurate, I think I not historical, but I write my family skeleton series is set with an adjunct English professor. I've never been an English professor of any description, but I know people who are academics and was trying to get it right. And I figured I had finally gotten it right when I had one review that said, well, she's clearly been out of the adjunct game for a while. It's like, yes, my entire life. And the other was when my editor asked, what was I going to be teaching the next semester?
Oh, good for you.
That was nice.
Yeah. And Jay has confirmed that he's talking. They're talking about being completely accurate by surprise.
If I'm accurate, I'm surprised.
Yeah, I think that a lot of that is just writing with the kind of confidence and not necessarily sticking all the details in.
Yeah.
Which seems sort of counterintuitive, but I remember I came across this early on in one of the early Kate Martinelli books. As a contemporary set, she's a cop in San Francisco, and I had somebody come to one of my early signings and say that they really enjoyed them, but they had to stop reading this particular one, To Play the Fool, because it's set in the Haight-Ashbury district in San Francisco, and they were on street patrol in the Haight-Ashbury while they were starting to read it. And it was like being at work. And so they had to put it away until they went off to another, other part of town. And I thought, I mean, I've never walked street patrol. I'm not a cop. I wasn't trying to fit in every little tiny detail of what it is. But if you write something that captures the essence of being a cop, people who are reading it, who really know, will be madly impressed with how good you are. So, and then you stick in, or if there's some arcane bit of knowledge that you have picked up somewhere and you just stick it in, it just impresses the hell out of people, because they think, man, this woman really knows her stuff.
It's been hours and hours of research.
It's just some little thing that you kind of, and you don't make a big point of it. You just kind of stick it in, and because of course, well, everybody knows this, right?
I think part of that is treating your characters like they're real human beings, even if you don't know all the ins and outs of their professions or their avocations or whatever. Because even if you say, I'm walking a beat in San Francisco, my feet hurt, these hills or whatever, and then you make a reference to the neighborhood. I mean, you start there, and then you can add some of those more, what is it? A narrative, or was it something to lend credence to an otherwise convincing narrative? Is that from
Verisimilitude.
Verisimilitude. Yes. Let's see. Oh, this is very nice. I've been a fan of Laurie's for 30 years and utterly adored Time's Undoing. I was very pleased to vote for it at Malice. I look forward to reading the other 3 novels works. Thank you for this. So I guess we're wrapping up. Thank you all so much. And please take a moment now to tell me what's next for you. What are you doing? What you got coming out? What are you celebrating now that you need people to know about?
I just sent in the second draft, the hopefully final draft for the book that's out in June. It's number 19 of Russell and Holmes, called we went back and forth on the title, but it was Knave of Diamonds. That's Knave, not N-A.
Nice.
Nice. And unfortunately, it's not book 19 of Holmes and Russell, because that leaves something lacking for the imagination.
No, that was the working title.
Who else has something coming up? Hey, Victoria.
Well, I have a book coming out in 25. I had a bad personal year last year, so I didn't get my book in until this year. I finished the second pass pages, and I just, of course, by now it's the worst book ever. But it's going to be coming out in July 25. It's The Last Gunny Rose. It's called The Last Wizard's Ball.
Nice.
And I'm working on something completely different.
Nice.
Because of course you are.
Yeah.
And I mentioned that I'm writing the Western, having lots of fun with that. I love the genre, and I've got a Black Pinkerton detective working with a Black Secret Service agent in 1870s Oklahoma territory.
Oh, I can't wait for that.
Fun.
Nice. Toni?
I've been saying this for the past 7,000 years. Working on the Seventh Family Skeleton. I think I finally got it where I'm going, because I changed the murderer just a couple of days ago, and now it's starting to make a lot more sense. I was accusing the wrong guy. I feel so bad. And I got a couple of short stories coming out, and The Skeleton Rides the Horse and other stories just came out this past summer, so that's still pretty fresh.
Well, and the fact that you're in the Best American Mystery and Suspense.
Yeah, that was an exciting email to get. I'm sure I gushed at the poor editor. Poor Steph. She's like, "Who is this?"
Okay, and let's see. Anna
What
Hoyt,
about you?
Anna Hoyt is out now. Oh man, it's a 21 Anna Hoyt salute. Thank you.
I'm here too.
My take on one of the great questions in Sherlockiana, as far as I'm concerned, about who Irene Adler really is a short story that we've put out ourselves. And apart from that, I am trying to figure out my next weaving project while I'm waiting for the next project to come down the pipeline, the next writing project.
Have you ever asked yourself, Dana, why your lead female characters' names are palindromes?
I have not. I've noticed that they are palindromic and also 2 syllables. The only exception is Zoe. So, and Dana is not really a palindrome.
No.
So it could be nada, which,
Some days. My main characters' names always end in A. It's like I've got Georgia, Laura, Tilda. I don't know. Not for the short stuff, but for the novels.
And I was to say, and Cheryl, you have Charlie Mack, you have Megan Mackenzie. There's a sort of a Mac thing going on here.
I hadn't thought of that. And my maiden name is McGarra.
Ooh.
That's okay. I have to get therapy about this.
Okay, I'm sorry. Send the bills to me. I apologize. See, that's the problem with hanging out with such astute writers, because they pay attention to these little things, put it together, and you're like, okay, well, I'm going to have to up my medication or something else. Thank you very much indeed. But thank you so much. This has been such a blast for me, and I always have time, a good time talking with you all in singularly and en masse. So thank you again. And thanks to the folks.
Thanks for inviting us.
Thanks for letting me be among these luminaries. I appreciate it.
But okay, so I guess we'll say goodnight then. And I look forward to seeing you all in person as soon as possible.
Oh, that would be great.
Dana
Good night, all.
Dana was leaving. She's putting the loom into luminary.
I like that, Toni. Very good.
Here's the thing.
And on that high point.
Goodbye.
This is the point where I always point out to Toni that she's always going for the low-hanging fruit, to which Toni says, that's the only fruit I can reach because I'm short.
That's great.
Yeah, it's
So
fair.
nice to be with you guys.
Okay.
I'm going to Bye-bye.
Bye. Good night. Thank y'all.
Good night, guys.
Good night, Laurie. Good night, Toni.